Dr. Maxie Hollingsworth is a pre-K through fifth grade math teacher. And I love that, pre-K through fifth grade math teacher. I wish I had her when I was young. And she's in Houston, Texas. Maxie leads reading and math interventions at her school. Even though the learning process has moved online, she's not let it hold her back. And joining her is the president of the American Federation of Teachers, a good friend of mine, Randi Weingarten, who's worked tirelessly for the safe reopening of schools. I want to thank you both for joining us. Randi, I would love to hear how many Maxies out there are there. We're going to hear Maxie's story in a moment, but how many Maxies are out there in terms of those people scrambling, trying to hold it together? And let me just say that I know that while Maxie is innovative in this space, I also know it's exhausting. And I just want to read one thing. I've got it somewhere in my papers. I just loved it. That are with me just a moment, folks. This is not the pretty side of live TV, but it's just so great, a tweet. She says, cooking and toggling between two virtual meetings. 8-year-old roommate, sous chef, is engrossed in this discussion on effective math practices. Can't get good help these days. It's a remarkably wonderful tweet filled with opportunity and tension. So, with that, so Randi, tell us what the map looks like of talent and innovation out in the world that you're working with.
Well, look, there's no one like Maxie. Every one of our members, or so many of our members, are just amazing people. They are innovative, they are creative, they are resilient, they are compassionate, they are smart, they are savvy, and they are making a difference with kids every day in very uncertain times. And Maxie is an amazing example of that. And without taking anything away from Maxie, and I hate when there's these kind of comparisons, there's hundreds of thousands of people, of educators all over the country, really trying to figure out what to do to reach kids in an uncertain time when we're not getting the help or support from, the powers that be, whether it be the current president, or whether it be the current Secretary of Education, and frankly, whether it be in many, many cases, current superintendents or legislators who are looking at all of this through whatever political haze and lens they do. And basically, it's come down to individual teachers to try to figure out how to engage kids, how to make them feel safe, how to really focus on instruction in the midst of this once in 100-year pandemic. And that's exactly what Maxie is doing every single day.
Well, that's a very sobering. Maxie, if I have it right, my understanding is about 60% of your students are online and the other chunk are in the classrooms. So you're doing this hybrid thing. So tell us how you're holding it together.
It's, I feel some days like I'm really, I feel slapstick some days. It feels very well planned some days. It's every day is incredibly different. Every day is incredibly challenging. I have to make sure that I am fully engaging the students who are learning remotely. I have to get a real finger on the pulse of attention levels and understanding for the students who are in person. It's just really a challenge. And I'm very grateful to the parents who are making the sacrifice, because the majority of the students in my district did choose to learn remotely. And so that means that the parents are making a real sacrifice. We know that there are, especially mothers in particular, who have taken the brunt of this, and they have either had to quit their jobs or they have lost their jobs. And we're in a district that's majority Black and Hispanic. And so we've got real concerns with making sure that they are making ground and not losing ground, but also that our teachers and our education support staff are supported and have the resources that they need in order to actually meet the needs of all of our students. And that's the real challenge there. It's everyone is making a sacrifice. And in order for me to do my job, I've had to make some financial sacrifices, some personal sacrifices. I'm hoping that those sacrifices actually do pay off.
Hey, Maxie, are there any things that you've stumbled into in this time? And I know this is an awkward question. Has anything gone better than you thought it would? Or have you found any, tricks or bank shots, in your responsibilities with these kids that, you were surprised by? that might give us some insight into that terrain a little bit?
Oh, sure. I was actually very surprised at how fluidly I took to the technology, to using learning platforms. I am a traditionalist. And my research tells me, I have a research background, and that tells me that children learn best in person, and they still do. That hasn't changed. But how they have really taken to the various learning platforms that we were required to learn this year, and really fast. And so my learning curve was really very high, but I'm happy that I've been able to incorporate that into my traditional instructional practices. What I have been surprised by is that interventions have been a lot easier to do remotely than I anticipated. And it's a lot easier to do that one-on-one. Actually, today, Thursday, is the day that I do interventions all day. And it goes a lot better because I've got a real focused set of kids, and I'm able to really work with them in a very intense way that I would not have been able to do normally. So I'm able to manage my time a lot better. Transitions are a lot more seamless. And some of that is just logistically. We have fewer students. We're not moving around as much. So my day really does, it goes very fast. But there are definitely some things that I would do differently.
No, I mean, I don't want to pry, but your 8-year-old sous chef is, I assume, someone you cohabit with in your family?
Yes, she's actually in the other room because I teach. Actually, I was very lucky to be able to apply for and be selected for a virtual teaching position. And because my 8-year-old sous chef has a pre-existing medical condition, it was important for me to be able to work from home. And so she is learning from home, as is my 11-year-old. And so she's actually in the other room in her classroom, and she's doing a science project right now. And I'm gonna, when I'm done with this interview, we'll see what kind of mess she's made.
So Randi, when we get to the issues of flexibility
No
in teaching,
explosions, right?
Yeah,
No
exactly.
explosions.
So with flexibility in teaching, President-elect Biden, Kamala Harris, Tony Fauci, Anthony Fauci, I should say, others have come out and said we need to get kids in schools, that there are, particularly in the areas that Maxie teaches, in the pre-K through 5, it's almost vital to get them back into schools. We need special needs kids, get them back into schools. And Randi, I know you've been addressing this. So as I'd like our viewers to get a picture. And in this time of high drama, of high challenge, how can these kids go back to school? And what is, to hear what Maxie's talking about, the flexibility she needs, what would that package look like? What do we do to arm schools and to get this so that we can stop talking about this and get back to doing, the right kind of safe education?
Right. So number one, what Dr. Fauci and President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have said is that first and foremost, you actually have to tackle the curve. Like, you can't think about reopening more fulsomely as you have a surge of unvarnished of unprecedented dimensions. And so, if you listen to what they've said, we do actually have to tackle the curve right now, and we're getting perilously close to our entire healthcare system collapsing. And but there is, so schools are not an island, but there is really good news from the fact that we in places like New York City, in the 6 or 8 weeks where they were opened in September and October, we had very good data that showed that schools themselves were not super spreaders, particularly elementary schools. And so based upon that data, and it was based upon the testing that the UFT, my union, insisted on, and there was the same kind of naysayer saying it costs too much, would never be able to do it. But that's the data that everybody is now relying on to say that with safeguards like masks and physical distancing and cleaning and ventilation, and using testing aggressively so you have an early warning system, that we believe that that schools for kids with special needs and schools for elementary school, kids can actually be back in school, and that's really good news. But I want to actually say to couple it with something that Maxie just said, which is the key to all of this is that we must make sure that for both teachers and for parents, they have real accommodations. Like they can actually say, I don't trust it yet, so I need to still have remote learning. And for educators, they need to be able to say, my kid is immunocompromised. I need to have that accommodation. You can't have people walk into school who are fearful that their lives are or their kids' lives or their parents' lives are going to be harmed because of asymptomatic spread. So that is going to have to be a real piece in the reopening of schools, school buildings in the next semester. But as you said, Steve, I've put out in your publication in The Hill, basically an 8-point plan of how we can actually have real in-school learning next semester, tackle the virus, have these safeguards, have testing, but also focus on elementary schools and schools for kids with special needs, but also make sure that we align the vaccination priority with schools that are reopening. And so that after healthcare personnel who should be first on the priority list and elderly who are really at risk, particularly in nursing homes, that we then have teachers who are back in school in person be the next priority. Because we know that in-school learning works better than remote. But as Maxie just said, remote is a good supplement, and we need to actually figure out ways of what we've learned here, like on one-to-one tutoring or things like that, that we can also use. And that means really listening to teachers. And if we were really listening to teachers, one practice that teachers will tell you does not work is if you are in school talking to a group of kids and teaching them and trying to do live streaming at the same time. So bottom line, safeguards are working, particularly for younger kids. Younger kids are listening to the rules more than older kids.
Right.
Tackle the curve. Let's reopen schools safely in the spring semester as we're tackling that curve and plateauing it with the safeguards and testing. But listen to teachers about what we need to do better instructionally and what we need to do to address the well-being of kids.
Let me tell our viewers that Randi Weingarten's op-ed page is on the Hill's opinion pages. It was published on Monday, and it's a very powerful kind of how to do it, what we need sort of roster. We're sort of in lightning round right now, Maxie, because we're running out of time, but I wanted to kind of get to you because I know you have views on how we need to make education sustainably funded, how we need to solve the education equity challenge. And I know this is unfair at the minute, but I want to give you an opportunity to give us a few top-of-mind thoughts that you have on that front.
I think the main thing is that we really need to approach education policy very differently. We need to have leaders at the state and at the federal level who, number one, have some background in public education. They're going to be much better informed than policymakers and lawmakers who don't have a background in education and are relying on trends or the next fad in education. And we've seen too much of that. And we have got to get back to the fundamentals. What does research tell us about how children learn best? What does research tell us about best practices instruction? We know that. We have plenty of colleges of education around the country that are doing top-notch teacher development. And so we know these things. It's time for us to use and implement and fund. The other thing is that we need to start funding public education in a very different way. Property taxes is not the way to get it done. We know this. So we have enough data right now that tells us what works and what doesn't. It's now time to get a change in leadership. We need a change in leadership that can be bold. We need a change that is much more progressive than what we've had. We need to equitably support public schools, make the rules and regulations the same for charter and public schools. So there are lots of things that we need to do, but it all starts with education policy. We are losing teachers before this pandemic. There's a teacher shortage. We are not pulling in enough people who want to come into this profession. And in order to make that change happen, we're going to have to look at education policy as well. So we've got lots of things that we have to do. So teacher recruitment, equity, we've got to make sure that all of our students are well served by highly qualified teachers. And then also, of course, we've got to get rid of these mandates for standardized testing.
Well, thank you for that. We're going to have you back because that's a full load. We're going to have to have a broader discussion. But we've got a question from our audience from Greg. Greg?
Hello. I'm Greg Waples with the National Association of Secondary School Principals. My question has to do with the homework gap that many K-12 students find themselves in. Millions of children were already falling behind before the pandemic began due to lack of access to broadband connectivity, and the problem has now gotten much worse. Can you discuss what federal policy solutions need to be enacted to close the homework gap for students learning remotely?
Randi, let me ask you to tackle that.
So, first off, thank you for the work that principals are doing all across the country trying to figure out. There are a lot of really great principals who are trying to work with really great teachers like Maxie to figure out how to deal with all of the million questions that come up in terms of helping kids right now. But I think part of the problem, Greg, is that we call it the homework gap. It's not the homework gap. It's an equity issue. It is the fact that 15 million kids, and sorry that I get so angry about this, 15 million kids in America don't have access to connectivity. And so, you know, if your home does not have the high-speed internet that I have right now, that my family is paying $250 a month for, how are you going to actually be able to do video on remote in the way in which you have to? How are you going to actually, and then what happens in terms of not having or having a computer? You can't use, you know, this is a Apple smartphone. We need to have computers, not smartphones, for kids. So yes, we need the E-rate program to get better. We need it to be expanded. But this should have been in the CARES 1 package, and this should be in the package right now. And instead of McConnell continuing to say, we can't fund this or we can't fund that, these things should be funded right now and should have been funded months and months ago. It's not a homework issue. It's an equity issue. It's an instruction issue. It's a well-being issue. And we need to do that for all of our kids.
Thank you. Maxie, do you have a quick bit on that?
I do. I think one of the main challenges is that when we don't look at what resources that we need to get into the hands of our students who are learning at home, as well as the students who are in the classroom, we've got to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. I've got students who are learning at home who don't have math manipulatives like this base 10 block I've got here on my desk because we didn't have the funding to be able to send home kits. Now, my daughter's school could do that because she attends a highly resourced public school that is highly resourced because the parents raise $120,000 a year for that campus. So I teach at a Title I campus, but my daughter attends a highly resourced public education school. And that difference shouldn't be there. My daughter's getting a very good education, and the students in my school should get the same one because the funding is equitable.
Can I just thank you both? This is very, very candid. It has both elements that are inspiring and, help our people. And I can also hear the palpable frustration. I want to thank Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, Maxie Hollingsworth, educator and interventionist in Houston, Texas. I hope you'll both be back because I don't think we're done with this set of topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.